It's now time for Energy Insights, where you get an inside view and local perspectives of all the oil and gas progress going on in the Mid-Ohio Valley. This program is being brought to you by the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association and can be heard every Saturday at 9 a.m. on local radio WMOA AM 1490 and ESPN radio WJAW FM 100.9 and AM 630. It's now time for the show. Here's Johnny Wharf, your local host.
Energy Insights on a Saturday morning, and this is brought to you by Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association. Brian Chavez is a local energy producer and joins us on the program. Once again, we had an opportunity to talk several weeks ago, but today we get to speak after touring through parts of the Oil and Gas Museum together, and it's amazing how we first were kind of stopped in our tracks outside here, and we saw the old Oklahoma drag or whatever that's called out there, and you explained how some of that stuff works. But I had mentioned this several weeks ago to Paul that how a bunch of rusty pipes could look fascinating.
Absolutely. There's so much history here. And the one thing that I was struck by was how much of the old artifacts that the museum had and how much we're still using in our everyday life. So what was good then is still good now. The old-timers, they were amazing in their innovation and what they were able to accomplish. Like my father-in-law says sometimes, it's back when the derricks were wooden and the men were iron. They were able to accomplish so much, and it still holds true now.
All right, so for just what little we've walked around in here, anything jump out to you more than another thing? I mean, we go back from the late 1600s and early 1700s and into modern times here, and there's just so many fascinating things.
Absolutely. The thing that strikes me is the diversity of everything that's here. So it's not only oil and gas, but they also have Civil War artifacts. They have World War I, they have World War II, they have glassware, typewriters, yarn. I just found myself wandering around the Ames Shovel Factory display. They have so much of the local history here. So it's much, much more than oil and gas, but you do learn so much about the oil and gas. This is actually one of the only museums I've ever been to where you could touch the artifacts. You can pick them up. You need to be careful whenever you do it, but it's no other place you can get up close to a registry book that's 125 years old, and you can see where they were tracking the oil and gas sold 125 years ago and the payments that were put out. Beautiful handwriting. It's like no other museum I've ever been to.
And then Brian Chavez is our guest, local oil and gas producer. We talked a little bit about some of the murals and, that depict the time as it related to the industry, and they're going to have actually one redone out here on the side of the wall of the Oil and Gas Museum. But the ones that are hanging in here, and if you think about oil paint on a fabric back in the day, which may or may not have been canvas or something similar to it, these things have held up pretty well.
They are truly works of art. You can look at them, you can see the effort that went into them, and the thought that went behind depicting them. They weren't just slapping it together, but they were trying to tell a story. And something that means something a little bit more to me is my father-in-law, who is a well-recognized person in the industry, Carl Heinrich. His mother was actually commissioned as a college student to paint some of these murals that hung in a very predominant hotel in Pittsburgh for a real long time. So seeing that wrap back around and coming back to be displayed in a local museum is something very special to me.
Oh my gosh, that is a fabulous story, and I'd heard from Catherine Liggett about the portrait story. I'll just pick them up. I'm going to happen to be in New Hampshire or something like that. And so I would imagine we know just from the stuff that we touch or what you see when you're out at a local auction that might be for sale, the history that's involved in so many things. Come in here and it's multiplied by 100 stories that will maybe never be told. And so I think it's why museums exist, is to keep things alive and maybe to add one more story to a piece.
Absolutely. We need to honor the past. We need to preserve the past. There's so many stories out there that I think people have in them, and they don't realize that they have the ability to get that story out and preserved. So if they contacted the museum, they can help them with, finding old pictures, anything that they have in their house that they come across. They say, well, I'm not sure what I can do with this. There's probably some relation to the oil and gas industry, or if not, they'll still take it in the museum because it is part of our history. we look back and go, man, I wish I would have, or I wish someone else would have. Well, now's the time for us to do that for someone else.
Your transition into the industry, the Brian Chavez story of this, if it's shorter than some of the old timers, you've got to have had a history background because you seem so interested and you know so much about the history, particularly as it relates to the area. And I know that you haven't lived here all your life, but it sounds like you do.
It's just something that you're passionate about and something that I really embrace. I hope more people understand that this area is so rich in history that we take for granted. You know, we need to make sure we step back and look at the forest and not just the tree that's right in front of us.
Yeah, what an opportunity to dip your toe into it here at the Oil and Gas Museum, 3rd Street, Parkersburg. You are welcome to stop by at any time and any of their other properties that they run underneath the Oil and Gas Museum entity here. I want to thank Brian Chavez for joining us here on Energy Insights, brought to you each and every Saturday morning by the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association.
Thank you for listening to Energy Insights, brought to you by the Southeastern Ohio Oil and Gas Association. Tune in every Saturday at 9 a.m. on WMOA and ESPN Radio WJAW as Johnny Wolf brings you your local and inside perspectives of the oil and gas progress going on in the Mid-Ohio Valley.